Welcome back, everyone. My name is Jean. I am a researcher at the Center for Community-Based Research.
And my name's Lauren. I'm a research intern at the Center for Community-Based Research.
And welcome to webinar number 2 of Evaluating Refugee Programs, a workshop in evaluation capacity building. This webinar is 2 of 5 that are a part of a 3-year project funded by Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, designed to build evaluation capacity in the refugee settlement sector. We have done workshops across the country in a partnership between the Center for Community-Based Research in Waterloo, Ontario, and the Evaluation Capacity Network at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. These online webinars are meant to be used as a source for those who were unable to attend the workshops on community-based evaluation, for those who attended the workshop and want a refresher on the content, or just for those who have a keen interest in building their evaluation capacity. In webinar number 1, Lauren and Sherry discussed what evaluation is, the basics of community-based evaluation, and why community-based evaluation is important for refugee programs. In this webinar, we will begin to unpack the how to conduct evaluations in order to build evaluation capacity. Again, we invite you to check out our project's website at www.evalforrefugee.ca, as there are a number of additional resources, primer videos, future workshops that will be offered across Canada, an outcomes inventory based on reports and literature in the refugee sector, additional evaluation resources and online sites, and PowerPoint slides from this workshop. This project is guided by a national advisory committee of practitioners, academics, networks, and people with lived refugee experience. In addition, we are in the process of developing a mentorship program, a list of people that are interested and willing to mentor, coach, and work alongside the refugee programs in evaluation, and a Canada-wide community of practice that will be coming soon.
So before we begin the how section, let's quickly review what evaluation is. Evaluation is an organized approach to collecting information about activities, impacts, and effectiveness that helps to improve a program or organization and describe its accomplishments. We are proposing applying a community-based evaluation model when evaluating refugee programs. The community-based evaluation approach, or CBE, involves active participation of stakeholders in all phases of evaluation. So that can include purpose, questions, methods, data collection and analysis, and mobilizing findings. The stakeholders drive the evaluation and are deeply engaged in the process. The aim of CBE is implicating all stakeholders in producing useful results for positive change. Community-based evaluation is important and different from other forms of evaluation. It is stakeholder-driven, participatory in nature, and action-oriented. So, how do you practically do it? In these next 4 webinars, we are going to discuss the process of CBE. The remainder of these webinars will present the steps to conduct a community-based evaluation for refugee programs. As you can see in this slide, there are 4 phases of community-based evaluation. Each of the following webinars will describe a phase in this model. So in this webinar, we'll be discussing phase 1, laying the foundation. Before we go into depth and start discussing the intricacies of phase 1, though, let's first just do a quick overview of all the phases. And before I do that, you'll notice each phase is divided into relational and technical aspects. This is because community-based evaluation is a combination of technical and relational tasks. So starting with phase 1, which is the blue circle on the slide, is laying the foundation. This is based on how to engage stakeholders in the process. Next is phase 2, evaluation planning. From there, phase 3 is information gathering and analysis. In this stage, we must understand how to plan ahead in order to manage the expectations of the users. As we're gathering information and analyzing, we may have to revise our question or reframe our question. So that's linked to those arrows that are kind of going back and forth between the two, phase 2 and phase 3. Phase 4 is acting on findings. So this is the final stage, and we're trying to disseminate the findings to make positive change. So to reiterate, phase 1 is all about laying a solid foundation for the evaluation to build from. This includes identifying stakeholders and organizing a steering committee, identifying assumptions about evaluation, highlighting the theory of change, and identifying the purpose of the evaluation.
Here is an overview of the illustration case study that we use. This illustration is meant to serve as an example to help you visualize the phases in conducting evaluation with a real-life experience. This is the Working Together project. On this slide, you can see the program goal, which is successful employment for government-assisted refugees by delivering tailor-made language and vocational skills in the workplace of the partnering employers. Listed under the icons are the key stakeholders in the evaluation. Here is another way of showing stakeholders in the Working Together project.
So one of the first steps in laying the foundation is identifying stakeholders and organizing a steering committee. We can begin to do this through stakeholder mapping. Stakeholder mapping is a way to identify the key stakeholders that should be considered in the evaluation. So I'll just refer to the stakeholder map, which is on the right side of your slide here. So in the innermost circle, you can see individuals with lived experience. The middle circle, that's the influencers. So that can include program providers. And then the outermost circle are the sustainers. So the funders or the people with power to help make the organization or program sustainable. So we're going to be walking through stakeholder mapping for a number of future slides. But I invite you at this moment to pause the video and take some time to think to yourself, what are ways that we could involve stakeholders? And you can see a number of suggestions at the bottom of our slide here. It may include evaluation participants, an evaluation team, a steering group, feedback sessions, or implementing recommendations. Community-based evaluation uses a stakeholder committee to guide the evaluation. Before the evaluation does anything, they vet their ideas through this group. The steering committee is made up of the various stakeholders of the program. A stakeholder map helps to inform who is on the steering committee. So you may consider making one of these, and we will actually be making one of these later on in this webinar. The steering committee helps to guide the evaluation through each step of the process. They meet regularly throughout the evaluation. It's important to note that involving stakeholders on a steering committee makes it more likely that the evaluation results will be used. So doing so is highly recommended.
Using the Working Together project as an example, here is how we might categorize stakeholders in a stakeholder map. Notice how the individuals with lived experience are the innermost circle, followed by the influences, and lastly, the sustainers in the outermost circle. Mapping stakeholders of your refugee serving project. We would suggest you pause this video and do the exercise 1, or you can do it later. The exercise consists of answering the following questions. Who is a stakeholder? What groups of people have a stake in your refugee serving project? Who could join your project evaluation steering committee? Who could you invite to join a guiding steering committee that would bring these different stakeholders' perspectives?
So after determining the stakeholders, it's important to consider different assumptions they may have about the evaluation. It's also a good opportunity to consider our own perceptions of evaluation, or the people who are in charge of conducting the evaluation. It's our responsibility to determine the people who are our allies or partners and what they think about evaluation. There are going to be various assumptions from lots of different people and groups, such as funders, managers, and participants. You may already be thinking of some previous examples in your own life, in your own work, that this has happened. So this feedback is important to gather during phase 1, because from there you can set the goals and expectations of evaluations together. And then that also gives you the space to explore how everyone's expectations may differ from each other. It's important that there's a shared understanding at the outset of an evaluation about the purpose.
Now let us look at the theory of change. The theory of change is a clear statement or narrative of what the program is supposed to do and explain what a program does, activities, and the results that are expected because of those activities. Here we mean outcomes and impact. This means that it needs to be clear and be agreed upon by the steering committee. The activities and outcomes and daily link need to be clear because that is what we are meant to be evaluating. The theory of change is a high level of change. The logic model is a graphic way of representing a theory of change. A narrow view of what is happening, and will outline what happens in the program to lead to the outcome.
So this example illustrates an ultimate outcome or desired change. So if we were to pretend that we were offering this training in person and the participants of the training were hungry, but in an unfamiliar neighborhood where the training was being held, our goal, what we would like to do is feed the participants who are hungry. And we do need to fix this problem of their hunger. So we will look at this problem formulated in a logic model. So at this point in time, we can ask ourselves, how would we go about solving this problem? And then what do you think occurs between our solution and satiation? So this slide looks at what a logic model is in detail. A logic model describes the activities in a program and then how those activities lead to different outcomes. So if you refer to the chart right in front of us, the inputs are the resources such as staff, volunteers, funding. And then next, the activities are program events or strategies at the individual or community level designed to achieve the outcomes. And then next, you have the outputs, which are tangible results of the major activities. So that could be the number of people trained or the resources produced. And then next, we have our outcomes. Outcomes are the impacts on those people whom the organization wanted to benefit. This includes changes in knowledge, understanding and actions, enhancements in skills, and changes in conditions. So specifically, we can have immediate outcomes. So that includes immediate changes as a result of activities. Then there are the intermediate outcomes. They're the changes in the midterm. So if we were to consider our timeline, we might start to see those after a number of months or perhaps years. And then finally, we have our ultimate outcomes, or sometimes we call those our long-term outcomes. And that's our long-term intended impact. So again, that could just be a bit further down the road, a number of years or even decades. So at this point in the webinar, we are inviting you to do an activity to help put what we've just been talking about into practice. So what do you think a logic model for your refugee serving project would look like? So I invite you to pause the video in a minute and just do what you can. So you can plug in the relevant information about your project into the chart in front of us here. I just want to remind you, it certainly does not have to be perfect. And we're also going to be walking through a few more examples of logic models. So you can always go back to what you start today. But this is just kind of to get us practicing. And then again, this is perhaps more of a reminder for myself because it takes some time for me to understand this as well. That there is a difference between a theory of change and a logic model. The theory of change, like Jean has already mentioned, is a higher level theory of how change is expected to happen, while the logic model, which is what we're looking at right now, that's more of a tangible graphic that will illustrate the change process at a program level.
Yeah, on this slide, you can see an example of a logic model template. The box in light blue are the ones we see. So the inputs are the resources, the activities are what is being done, and outputs are the metrics we need to collect. It may be funding, cost, and so on. This slide is simply a way to visualize this process. A part of the logic model is a way to walk through the connections of all the steps in the program. Indicators are numbers and reports that tell you the achievements of a particular thing. It quantifies and qualifies what the outcomes may be. The logic of going left to right is not about how to build it, but how we think reality works in our programs. In portraying our program, we think we have input, activity, and output that will lead us to have short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes. The main challenge is to connect our outcomes to the input and how they relate to the outcome of change. There are many things that we as evaluators don't know about the program, so it is important that the conversation is continuous between all members of the steering committee.
So coming back to the example of feeding our hungry participants, this could be its logic model. So this is an extremely simple example, and in no way it captures the complexity of social programs. But it is an example of the steps to address an issue. It illustrates what a logic model could look like. I do want to mention that this example is adapted from a place called Claremont Graduate University, which is why you might just notice a few abbreviations like CGU or note of Claremont throughout this slide. So in building left to right, we can see our inputs. So right at on the very left are people, funds, and technology. That then flows into the activities, which are the locations and maps of locations. And then the outputs are the maps being created and received. And then this in turn will create our short-term outcomes of people learning about their restaurant options and locations, which will lead to intermediate outcomes of participants going to the restaurants or ordering the food, and eventually reach our long-term goal of having our participants no longer hungry. Note that we've also listed any assumptions we may have and the context in which this logic model takes place.
Some final tips to remember for logic models include: be conscientious on whether you need another box or not when developing a logic model. Spend time thinking about everyone understanding the meaning behind each box. Communication between all stakeholders. Are there extra steps that need to be taken that we haven't looked at yet? These steps are not written in stone, so as our understanding of the programs continues to increase, we can go back and make the necessary changes. However, do not get stuck in do loops. Ensure that you have a time limit in order to do progress, because they can easily be prolonged.
So this is another example of a logic model using the Working Together project, which Jean had introduced. Feel free to pause the video. It's quite complex, and investigate the various components of this slide. So this might be more of what a classic logic model could look like, but not all logic models look the same. And you can be creative in both the process of how you produce it with stakeholders and then what gets shared in the end. So here's an example of a supportive housing model for teen families. We worked through a logic modeling process by drawing the components of a tree to illustrate our inputs, activities, outcomes, and challenges. In this model, the input is the sunshine, which is nourishing the tree. The roots are the activities, the outcomes are the buds and the apples, and the long-term outcome is the apple pie. Don't be afraid to get creative, so long as your model is including all points in the logic model. And then this is a diagram illustrating a systems theory of change for refugee newcomers to Canada. The Evaluating Refugee Programs project did a review of settlement and resettlement outcomes in the literature. This chart summarizes that review, which is included in the outcome inventory, which I believe we've placed on the website. You can use this outcome inventory when building your own logic model. Feel free to pause the video and take some time to review this model for an example of a theory of change diagram.
We have tackled the theory of change and the logic model in our learning. Now we are ready to discuss the purpose of the evaluation. The purpose statement creates clarity on what the program is and what the intended outcomes of the evaluation will be. The purpose statement is clearly worded and reflects the interests of all stakeholder groups. We can have different purposes of evaluation that may include summative. With this, evaluation serves as an accountability function, which means, is the program working or not? Should it continue or not? There is not a lot of learning here. We just make a decision based on results. The purpose of evaluation may be formative. It allows us to learn more about the program so that we can improve the program. We can learn about the perceptions of our users. We go into outcomes of our process, but gives the program a chance to learn from what we did and what to change in the future. The purpose of evaluation also may be developmental. It depends on the maturation of a program. If a program is new, it is good to have a developmental approach. If a program is new, it may require quick changes and adaptations based on what is learned through the evaluation. Sometimes you start with developmental and transition to formative, and you can go back and forth as things change. People think of this as a separate silos, but in reality, there is a lot of overlap from all these evaluations. They often work in conjunction with each other. At the top of this slide, you can see the different elements of a purpose statement. You begin with the purpose of this evaluation is to, and use a verb followed by the scope, target audience, and focus of evaluation. Indicates process and outcome plus in order to plus explain the action or use of the evaluation. This breakdown can act as a template for you to develop your purpose statement. Next, you see an example of this template using the working together project purpose statement is the purpose of this evaluation is to create an ongoing evidence-based forum to inform and stimulate the working together project partners in order to develop innovative approaches to improving the vocational and language skills of refugees in the workplace. At the bottom, you can see another way of understanding purpose statements. They can help to clarify if your evaluation is process-oriented, which assesses the activities components and your logic model, outcome-oriented, which assesses the outcome portion of your logic model, or future-oriented, which considers how to change and adapt your logic model. Here are some additional purpose statements. Please feel free to pause this video on this slide to read through the examples or refer to this slide when formulating your own purpose statement. Are these purpose statements example of evaluation that is summative, formative, or developmental, or a combination? Are they examples of evaluation that focus on process outcomes or future direction, or a combination? I will now ask you to pause the video and create your own evaluation purpose statement. Think to yourself, what is the purpose of your evaluation? Write the purpose of the evaluation of your refugee serving project. As advised, keep the main thing.
Thanks, John. So we are just coming to our last slide of the webinar now. So just to briefly recap, in this webinar, which is webinar number 2 of 5, we presented and discussed phase 1 of conducting an evaluation, which is about laying the foundation. The phase comprises 4 steps, which are identify stakeholders and organize the steering committee, identify assumptions about evaluation, highlight the theory of change, and identify the purpose of the evaluation. Thanks very much for listening and for participating in this second webinar, and we look forward to seeing you again.